This is Tony T here from Tony'sPicks.com with our college football pick show here for Saturday, September 27th. We'll have picks from all 47 games. For more free pick videos, be sure to subscribe to our channel. Lots of free picks over our channel, delivered by myself as well as our team of cappers here at Tony'sPicks.com. Give us a like, a thumbs up. We greatly appreciate it. We go live every day, 9:30 a.m. Eastern time. It is the Tony Hicks Morning Show, so check it out and interact with us in the live chat. Then visit our site, Tony'sPicks.com. We're our multi-capper site showcasing our top performers. Click the links to the hot cappers, get signed up to long-term passes. You see our top performers up there like Sean Higgs up there on top of the leaderboard. Solo has been red hot up there. Ron Crawford as well, hitting the board. Rod's been cranking it as well on there. These are guys you know from our live show as well as our YouTube videos. Chris Atkins as well, hitting the leaderboards as well. Latest premium picks here said the page with best bets and more will be locked and loaded for this Saturday card. And remember our promo code TonyT at checkout knocks off that 15%. The link's in the description to get signed up. All right, so let's go ahead. Let's get this one underway. All right, we start with Notre Dame and Arkansas here for Saturday. You know, Notre Dame is 1-2 after their 56-30 home victory against Purdue by an Irish 535 yards, 254 rushing for 5.9 yards a carry. Defensively, they limited the Boilermakers on the ground, but gave up 303 yards passing for 7.6 yards per pass attempt. C.J. Carr, 10-12 passing for 223 yards and 2 touchdowns. Arkansas moves to 2-2 with their 32-31 road defeat at Memphis. Razorbacks rushed for 175 yards for 5.5 yards a carry and effective in the passing game. On defense, they allowed 290 yards rushing the Tigers for 7.1 yards per rush, 6.4 yards per pass attempt. Taylor Green here, 18 of 34 passing for 325 yards with a touchdown and 2 picks. Notre Dame's defense is struggling to defend the pass, giving up 289 yards per game, 8.1 yards per pass attempt. Arkansas's offense has been balanced with 6.8 yards per run, 9.7 yards per pass attempt. On defense, they've held opponents to 4.4 yards a carry and 59% completions for 6.8 yards per pass attempt. Notre Dame's allowed 41 at home to Texas A&M. We'll take Arkansas here at plus the 5.5. Rutgers and Minnesota going off here on Saturday. We got Rutgers falling to 3-1 after a 38-28 home defeat to Iowa. The Scarlet Knights rushed for only 2.3 yards a carry, but had success through the air. On defense, they allowed 160 yards rushing to the Hawkeyes for 4.2 yards a carry, but 10.3 yards per pass attempt. Ethan Kakmanis, 24 of 40 passing, 330 yards with a pick. Minnesota 2-1 after a 27-14 road defeat in California. Golden Gophers rushed for 3.5 yards a carry and were ineffective in the passing game. Defensively, they held the Golden Bears to 2.5 yards a carry, 279 yards passing, 7.2 yards per pass attempt. Drake Lindsey in the game, 19-32 for 205 yards, a touchdown, and a pick. Rutgers has flashed offense this year with efficient quarterback play, 68% per completions, 9.2 yards per pass attempt. The Golden Gophers' offensive numbers have been inflated against wins against FCS, Northwestern State, and Buffalo at home. Scarlet Knights 5-3 of the spread as a road underdog. We'll take Rutgers here plus 5.5. South Alabama and North Texas for Saturday. South Alabama 1-3 after a 38-20 home defeat to Coastal Carolina. The Jaguars rushed for 223 yards for 5.1 yards a carry and were inefficient in the passing game. They defended the pass well, but allowed 182 yards rushing to the Chanticleers for 5.9 yards a carry. Bishop Davenport, 22 of 36 passing for 107 yards in the game with 2 interceptions. North Texas 4-0. Hey, they get the 45-38 road win at Army. Mean Green rushed for 229 yards, 5.5 yards a carry, and moved the football through the air. Defensively, they allowed 386 yards rushing to the Black Knights for 5.7 yards a carry and efficient passing as well. Drew Mestamaker here, 26-36 passing for 249 yards with a touchdown. South Alabama is struggling to defend the run, giving up 200 yards per game, 5.2 yards per attempt. North Texas rushing for over 5.5 yards a carry and getting accurate quarterback play. The Mean Green has been effective defensively in both the run against the pass. Mean Green have won and covered 4 of their past 5. Jaguars 5-8 the spread as a road underdog. Pick here will be North Texas here at minus 12.5. Duke and Syracuse for Saturday. All right, we've got Duke 2-2 after a 45-33 home victory against NC State. The Blue Devils rushed for 149 yards for 4.2 yards a carry and were effective throwing the football, but defensively they allowed 171 yards rushing to the ball pack for 4.9 yards a carry and 364 yards passing for 9.3 yards per pass attempt. Darian Mensah, 19-28 passing for 269 yards and 3 touchdowns. Syracuse improved to 3-1 with a 34-21 road win at Clemson. The Orange rushed for 155 yards, 4.1 yards a carry, and were able to move the football through the air. They allowed 140 yards rushing to the Tigers for 6.4 yards a carry, 5.9 yards per pass attempt. Ricky Collins here, 3 of 8 passing for 34 yards and a touchdown. Syracuse lost starting quarterback Steve Angeli for the year with an Achilles injury. The LSU transfer at least will have a full week of practice to get ready for this game. Duke's pass defense has given up 70% completion rate, 9.2 yards per pass attempt. Duke dropped their road game at Tulane by 7 and gave up 45 points in a 26-point home loss to Illinois. Duke 2-4 the spread on the road, facing teams that average 425 yards per game or greater. Syracuse 5-2 the spread at home with a regular 6-day work week. Pick here Syracuse plus 5.5. USC and Illinois going off here on Saturday. USC 4-0 after their 45-31 home victory here against Michigan State. The Trojans, pretty good game on the ground here, 289 yards rushing, 7.2 yards a carry. They're effective through the air. Defensively, they limited the Spartans' ground attack and allowed 225 yards passing for 9.8 yards per pass attempt. Jaden Mavia, 20 of 26 passing here for 234 yards and 3 touchdowns. He rushed for 2 scores. Illinois 3-1 with their 63-10 road defeat in Indiana. Fight Illini produced just 2 rushing yards and were ineffective through the air. On defense, they gave up 312 yards rushing for 6.5 yards a carry and were torched through the air. Luke Altmaier, 14 of 22 passing, 146 yards and a touchdown. Maivai was not accurate on the road here, 60% completion rate at Purdue. The Trojans allowed the Boilermakers in that road game 305 yards passing, 7.8 yards per pass attempt. Illinois has been efficient throwing the football on the season, but USC 1-8 to the spread as road favorite. Fight Illini 6-3 the spread at home. We'll take Illinois plus the 7. All right, we got UCF and Kansas State for Saturday. UCF 3-0 after a 34-9 home victory against North Carolina. In the game, the Knights rushed for 4.2 yards a carry. It was a really strong defensive performance, holding the Tar Heels to 63 rushing yards and 4.6 yards per pass attempt. Taven Jackson, 25 of 32 passing for 223 yards and a touchdown. Kansas State sits at 1-3 after a 23-17 road defeat at Arizona. Wildcats rushed for 4.3 yards a carry and were ineffective in the passing game. I should say Kansas State Wildcats there. They limited the Arizona passing attack but allowed 234 yards rushing for 5.2 yards a carry. Avery Johnson here, disappointment here, 13-29 passing for 88 yards and a rushing touchdown. UCF has been efficient on both sides of the football. They are running for 6 yards a carry and getting accurate passing. Their pass defense holds foes at 4.7 yards per pass attempt. Quarterback play has been poor for the Wildcats. They did get past an FCS school in North Dakota, but it was 38-35 to open the year, and they lost both home games. The Knights 4-2 the spread as an underdog. Pick here UCF plus 6. Georgia Tech and Wake Forest for Saturday. We've got here Georgia Tech 4-0 after a 45-24 home victory against Temple. The Yellow Jackets ran all over the Owls, 307 yards for 10.2 yards a carry. They shut down the Temple passing attack and allowed 184 yards rushing for 4.2 yards a carry. Haynes King, 13 of 18, passing for 161 yards and 2 touchdowns. Wake Forest 2-1 with their 34-24 home defeat to NC State. Even Deacon struggled on the ground with 59 yards. They allowed 205 yards rushing to the Wolfpack with 4.7 yards a carry and 6.3 yards per pass attempt. Robbie Ashford here, 21 of 35 passing for 252 yards and 2 interceptions. He had a rushing touchdown. Yellow Jackets struggled with the passing game in their lone road game, but were sharp defensively and rushing the football. Even Dinkins' passing game has been efficient at home, 8.3 yards per pass attempt with support from the ground game. Georgia Tech 0-4 the spread on the road, coming off a win by 17 or greater points. Pick here Wake Forest plus the 14. Cincinnati and Kansas for Saturday. Cincinnati 2-1 after their 70-0 home victory against FCS Northwestern State. Now, 2 weeks ago, it was a 34-20 home victory against Bowling Green. The Bearcats rushed for under 4 yards a carry, but effective throwing the football. They limited the Falcons to 2.9 yards a carry and 7.4 yards per pass attempt. Brendan Sorsby here in the game, 17 of 24 passing for 333 yards and 3 touchdowns. He rushed for 40 yards and a score. Kansas is 3-1 after a 41-10 home victory against West Virginia. The Jayhawks rushed for 242 yards with 5.9 yards a carry. They limited the Mountaineers' passing attack and allowed 181 yards rushing for 4.4 yards a carry. Jalen Daniels, 12 of 24 passing for 138 yards and 3 touchdowns. First road game for the Bearcats, who have a neutral site defeat to Nebraska by 3. Kansas has been balanced with effective rushing and accurate passing. The Bearcats have lost 3 straight on the road, failing to cover each game dating back to last season. These are true road games here. The quarterback play was very poor in that neutral site defeat. Cincinnati 2-5 to the spread on the road as an underdog of 3.5 to 10 points. Jayhawks are 5-0 to the spread at home against winning teams. Pick here will be Kansas minus the 5. Louisville and Pittsburgh for Saturday. Louisville 3-0 after a 40-17 home victory against Bowling Green. The Cardinals rushed for 4.3 yards a carry, but effective through the air. They limited the Falcons' run game, but allowed 190 yards rushing for 6.6 yards a carry. Miller Moss, 23 of 32 passing for 316 yards. Pitt, they're 2-1 after a 31-24 road defeat at West Virginia. The Panthers struggled on the ground with just over 1 yard per carry. They held the Mountaineers to 3 yards a carry, but 260 yards passing for 8.1 yards per attempt. Eli Olstein, 22 of 37 passing for 303 yards, a touchdown and a pick. He had a rushing score. Pittsburgh coming off a bye, and Louisville has played weak schedule. Cardinals have failed to cover all 3 games against their minor conference and FCS foes. The Panthers have an experienced quarterback and get efficient play from Holstein. The rushing yards the Cardinals allowed to their MAC foes still a concern. Louisville 1-9 to the spread as a road favorite. Pitt 4-1 to the spread as home dog. We'll take Pittsburgh here plus 4.5. Bowling Green and Ohio, this one for Saturday. Bowling Green 2-2 after their 40-17 road defeat to Louisville. The Falcons were able to rush for 190 yards for 6.6 yards a carry, but ineffectively throwing the football. Defensively, they allowed 4.3 yards a carry to the Cardinals, but 313 yards passing for 9.5 yards per pass attempt. Drew Pine, 11 of 21 passing for 131 yards with a touchdown and 2 interceptions. Ohio 2-2 after a 52-35 home victory to FCS Gardner-Webb. 2 weeks ago, it was a 37-9 road defeat at Ohio State. Bobcats could not get much going with their run game for 2 yards a carry and ineffective throwing the football. Defensively, they allowed 572 yards, really struggling both against the run and pass. Parker Navarro, 6 of 13 for 94 yards and a touchdown. Falcons were able to cover in road losses at Cincinnati and Louisville. In those road losses, they defended the run well and were able to rush for 4.6 yards a carry against power conference schools. Ohio has struggled to defend the pass at home by allowing 8.1 yards per pass attempt along with 4.5 yards per rush. The Falcons 8-2 to the spread as road underdog. The Bobcats 0-2 to the spread in consecutive home games. We'll take Bowling Green here plus the 10. Utah State and Vanderbilt, this one for Saturday. Utah State 3-1 after a 48-7 home victory against FCS McNeese State. 2 weeks ago, it was a 49-30 home victory against Air Force. The Aggies had a balanced attack in the win as they rushed for 186 yards for 5.5 yards a carry and effective passing. They did allow 266 yards rushing for 4.3 yards a carry and 179 yards through the air. Bryson Barnes, 19 of 27 passing, 293 yards, 3 touchdowns, and a pick. He rushed for 120 yards and 2 scores. Vanderbilt 4-0 after a 70-21 home victory against Georgia State. Commodores piled up 655 yards on that Panthers defense. Now defensively, they allowed just 32 yards rushing and 258 yards through the air, but only 5.4 yards per pass attempt. Diego Pavia, 18 of 24 passing for 245 yards with a touchdown. He had 86 rushing and a touchdown in the game. Vanderbilt has shown great offensive prowess on the ground and through the air. Pavia, with his skills running the football, hasn't been accurate throwing the football, and he backs up his words. Barnes is developing into a quality quarterback as the team is completing 65% of his passes here for 9 yards per pass attempt and getting production on the ground. We've seen Vanderbilt light up that scoreboard here against the non-power school. The Aggies were able to put up 22 at Texas A&M in a game that landed at a total here of 66 points. Utah State has gone over in 6 of 7 against the FBS. Commodores 10-4 the over at home. Pick here, Utah State and Vanderbilt over 59.5. Eastern Michigan and Central Michigan. This one for Saturday. All right, we've got Eastern Michigan 1-3 after a 34-31 home victory against Louisiana. The Eagles rushed for 183 yards for 5.1 yards a carry. They allowed 214 yards rushing to the Raging Cajuns for 6.7 yards a carry and 6.5 yards per pass attempt. Noah Kim here, 21-31 passing for 226 yards with a touchdown and pick. He had a rushing touchdown in the game. Central Michigan 2-2 after a 49-10 home victory against FCS Wagner. The Eagles 2 weeks ago fell at Michigan 63-3. Chippewa's offense generated just 119 yards. They gave 616 yards to the Wolverines. Joe Labus in the game, 4 of 8 passing for 26 yards and a pick. EMU has covered the past 2 games. They were able to put up 23 points on the road in Kentucky. They are rushing for 4.7 yards a carry and moving the football through the air. Western Michigan allowing 4.8 yards per rush, 9.7 yards per pass attempt. They are 0-3 as a home favorite of 7 or fewer points. We'll take Eastern Michigan here at +6. Georgia Southern and James Madison, this one for Saturday. Georgia Southern 2-2 after a 45-17 home victory against FCS Maine. 2 weeks ago, it was a 41-34 home victory against Jacksonville State. Eagles rushed for 219 yards for 5.2 yards a carry and effective in the passing game. They allowed 214 yards rushing to the Gamecocks for 5.1 yards a carry and 7.2 yards per pass attempt. J.C. French 16-24 passing for 191 yards and a touchdown. James Madison 2-1 with their 31-13 road win at Liberty. The Dukes put up really good offensive performance with 227 yards rushing for 5.5 yards a carry and effective through the air. They shut down the Flames' passing attack and held them to just 3.7 yards a carry. Alonzo on the ground. Alonzo Barnett here, 17-25 passing for 213 yards with a touchdown and a pick. He rushed for 2 scores and 45 yards. Georgia Southern's defense has been hammered on the road, giving up 50 points a game, 8.6 yards per rush, 11 yards per pass attempt. They got 20 points at USC and scored 41 at home against Jacksonville State. James Madison has rushed effectively at home here, 224 yards average, 5.2 yards a carry. Eagles 5-0 to the over in their past 5. The Dukes 4-1 to the over at home, ball on a road win here. We'll take Georgia Southern and James Madison over 57.5. Arkansas State and UL Monroe for Saturday. Arkansas State 1-3 after their 28-21 road defeat at Kennesaw State. The Red Wolves rushed for 3.3 yards a carry and were inefficient in the passing game. They were poor defending the pass, allowing 308 yards passing for 9 yards per pass attempt. Jalen Rayner here, 25-41 passing for 226 yards, 2 touchdowns. UL Monroe 2-1 after their 31-25 road win at UTEP. The Warhawks rushed for 250 yards for 5.9 yards a carry and effective in the passing game. They held the Miners just over 1 yard per rush and 409 yards passing, though, for 8.2 yards per pass attempt. Aiden Armenta goes 8-14 for 136 yards and 2 touchdowns. The Red Wolves were competitive in an 8-point home loss to Iowa State. They're getting accurate quarterback play. The Warhawks passing game completes just 56% and just 5.5 yards per pass attempt. Arkansas State has won and covered 9 straight against UL Monroe, so we'll take Arkansas State here at +2. Indiana and Iowa. This one going off here on Saturday. Indiana 4-0 after their 63-10 home victory against Illinois. Hoosiers had a monster offensive performance with 579 yards for the game. They held the fight on line 9 to just 2 yards rushing, 6.3 yards per pass attempt. Randall Mendoza 21-23 passing for 267 yards and 5 touchdowns. Iowa 3-1 after their 38-28 road win at Rutgers. The Hawkeyes were efficient in the passing game and rushed for 160 yards for 4.2 yards a carry. Hawkeyes held the Scarlet Knights here to 2.3 yards per rush and 330 yards passing for 8.3 yards per pass attempt. Mark Kronowski here, 12 of 18 passing for 186 yards. He rushed for 55 yards and 3 touchdowns. First road game for Indiana that played a weak non-conference schedule. Iowa pass defense against Rutgers is a concern against this Indiana team that piled up yardage on Illinois. The Hoosiers 3-0 the spread as road favorite. Pick here Indiana minus 7.5. We got Ohio State and Washington. This one for Thursday. All right, we got Ohio State 3-0 after a 37-9 home victory against Ohio. Buckeyes posted 572 yards with 7.3 yards per rush. They limit the Bobcats to 2 yards per run and 5.4 yards per pass attempt. Julian Sayin, 25 of 32 passing for 347 yards with 3 touchdowns and 2 picks. Washington 3-0 after their 59-24 road win at Washington State. Huskies posted 471 yards, 5.2 yards a carry with a huge game passing. They held the Cougars to under 1 yard per rush, 277 yards passing, 7.7 yards per pass attempt. Devin Williams here in the game, 16 of 19 passing for 298 yards and 4 touchdowns. He rushed for 88 yards and a score. Ohio State plays their first true road game of the season. The Huskies are hitting excellence this season at the 4 key endpoints. They rush for 6.1 yards a carry, average 11.3 yards per pass attempt. On defense, they hold teams at 2.4 yards per rush and 6.2 yards per pass attempt. First-year starter staying first true road game. It's a tough environment. Ohio State 3-5 the spread on the road on field turf. Huskies 3-1 to the spread home against winning teams. Pick here Washington plus the 8. Utah and West Virginia going off here on Saturday. Utah fell to 3-1 after a 34-10 home defeat to Texas Tech. Utes' offense was disappointing with barely 3 yards a carry and ineffective passing. They allowed 484 yards to the Red Raiders, defending the pass and running poorly. Devin Dampier, 25 of 38 passing for 162 yards with two picks, I should say. He averaged only 2.5 yards per rush. West Virginia 2-2 after a 41-10 road defeat at Kansas. Mountaineers' passing game failed, but they rushed for 181 yards for 4.4 yards a carry. They were crushed by the Jayhawks' run attack for 242 yards for 5.9 yards per attempt. Nico Markall has a foot injury and is questionable. He was ineffective in defeat. Jalen Henderson is a likely starter. He went 4 of 11 for 28 yards last week. He rushed for 118 yards and a touchdown. West Virginia has that look of a team to play them at home, fade them on the road. They're rushing for just over 5 yards a carry at home with an average of 55 attempts. It is almost a 3-to-1 ratio run and pass at home. The Utes have defended well on the road at UCLA and Wyoming, allowing an average of 8 points per game. Utah 3-0 to the under on the road, facing a team that averages 200 yards per game of greater rushing. West Virginia 4-1 to the under at home, facing teams that average 31 or greater points per game. Pick here will be Utah and West Virginia under 47.5. UCLA and Northwestern going off on Saturday. UCLA 0-3 after their 35-10 home defeat to New Mexico. Bruins were ineffective passing the football and rushed for 5 yards a carry. Defensively, they allowed 298 yards rushing to Lobos with 8.9 yards per pass attempt. Nico Iamaleava, 22 of 34 passing, 217 yards with a touchdown and a pick. Northwestern 1-2 after a 34-14 home defeat to Oregon. The Wildcats were ineffective through the air and rushed for 4.8 yards a carry. The offense came late when the game was decided. Preston Stone, 11 of 21 passing for 135 yards and 2 picks. The coaching change was made for the Bruins following the loss. UCLA showed competitiveness in a 7-point loss at UNLV. Northwestern was held to 3 points at Tulane. The Wildcats are allowing 5.6 yards per rush this year and only averaging 6.2 yards per pass attempt. UCLA 6-1 to the spread on the road after a loss. Northwestern 1-4 to the spread at home following a home game. So pick here will be UCLA plus the 6.5. Baylor and Oklahoma State for Saturday. Baylor fell to 2-2 after their 27-24 home defeat to Arizona State. The Bears rushed for 4.6 yards to carry and moved the ball through the air. They limited the Sun Devils' passing attack and allowed 179 yards rushing for 3.8 yards a carry. The Bears had a -3 turnover margin. Sawyer Robertson here, 25 of 39 passing for 250 yards with 3 touchdowns and a pick. Oklahoma State 1-2 after a 19-12 home defeat to Tulsa. Cowboys had good rushing numbers that failed in the passing game. They limited the Golden Hurricane through the air but allowed 205 yards rushing for 4.8 yards a carry. Zane Flores, 25 of 40 passing for 214 yards. He rushed 56 yards and a touchdown. Gundy, head coach, was fired after the loss. Baylor has played a tough schedule and has wins by 3 at SMU and posting 48 points. The Bears are getting production from their quarterback position, and the Cowboys are not. Oklahoma State's defense allowing 5.5 yards per rush, 8.3 yards per pass attempt. Baylor 7-1 of the spread on the road on field turf. Cowboys 5-10 the spread at home. We'll take Baylor here minus the 20.5. San Diego State and Northern Illinois for Saturday. We've got San Diego State here 2-1 after their 34-30 home victory against Cal. The Aztecs were efficient through the air and rushed for 5 yards a carry. They limited the Golden Bears to 2.1 yards per rush and 5.5 yards per pass attempt. Jaden Denigal, 15 of 18 passes for 189 yards with a touchdown. Northern Illinois 1-2 after a 38-10 road defeat at Mississippi State. Huskies rushed for 4.6 yards a carry but inefficient in the passing game. Defensively, they allowed 452 yards to the Bulldogs with 292 rushing yards for 6 yards per rush. Josh Holst in the game, 14 of 23 passing for 135 yards and a touchdown with a pick in there too. San Diego State in their lone road game was pounded 36-13 at a down Washington State team. NIU has been able to defend the pass well during the season. San Diego State rushing for only 3.8 yards a carry and not getting accurate play at the quarterback position. The Aztecs 2-7 straight up of their past 9 road games. Pick here in Northern Illinois here at plus 2.5. Rice and Navy for Saturday. Rice improved to 3-1 after their 28-17 road win at Charlotte. The Owls triple option produced 255 yards rushing for 5.5 yards a carry. They limited the 49ers to 2.5 yards a carry and allowed 5.9 yards per pass attempt. Chase Jenkins in the game, 8 of 11 passes for 87 yards with a touchdown. Navy 3-0 after their 42-23 road win at Tulsa. This shipment rushed for 367 yards for 5.8 yards a carry. They limited the Golden Hurricanes passing game and 4.2 yards a carry there. Blake Horvath, 6 of 10 passing for 94 yards with a touchdown and 2 picks. 2 triple option offenses meeting here. Each team practices against this defense, so they know what is coming here. The Owls are rushing for 4.6 yards a carry and limiting opponents to 4 yards per rush. Navy 0-3 of the spread at home, facing teams that average 200 yards rushing per game. I would expect a closer game than what is lined here, since each plays and runs the same time-consuming offense here. So we'll take Rice here at the plus 14.5. All right, next up we'll have for you Cal and Boston College will be the next game. ACC action here. California and Boston College going off here on Saturday. Cal drops to 3-1 after a 34-0 road defeat at San Diego State. Cal's ground game sputtered just 2 yards a carry and ineffective in the passing game. They allowed 4 yards a carry and 10.5 yards per pass attempt. Golden Bears had a -3 turnover margin. During Koi Sagpulele, 17 of 38 passing for 208 yards and 2 picks. Boston College 1-2 with their 30-20 road defeat at Stanford. BC rushed for only 2 yards a carry and moved the ball through the air. They allowed 213 yards rushing the Cardinal with 5.8 yards a carry along with 8.5 yards per pass attempt. Then Lonergan, 30 of 44 passing for 330 yards. The touchdown pick. It was a tough spot. It was a back-to-back road trip, and that was a tough spot there for BC there. His back-to-back road game down for Cal, who faces the Eagles coming off a bye week. Golden Bears on the road rushed for only 3.2 yards a carry and got inaccurate passing. Their pass defense has been poor on the road, where they allow 71% completions, 8.4 yards per pass attempt. BC's getting good quarterback play, 74% completion rate, 9.2 yards per pass attempt, 393 yards passing. The Eagles are defending the run and holding opponents to 6.3 yards per pass attempt. Cal 1-3 to the spread on the road, facing teams that average 425 yards per game or greater. Pick here, Boston College, -6. Auburn and Texas A&M for Saturday. Auburn fell to 3-1 after a 24-17 road defeat in Oklahoma. The Tigers struggled on the ground with less than 2 yards to carry. They stuffed the Sooners' ground attack and allowed 271 yards passing for 7.5 yards per pass attempt. Jackson Arnold, 21-32 passing for 220 yards with a touchdown. Texas A&M sits at 3-0 with a 41-40 road win at Notre Dame. The Aggies rushed for 4 yards to carry and excelled in the passing game. They limited the Fighting Irish ground attack and allowed 293 yards passing for 9.2 yards per pass attempt. Marcel Reed, 17-37 passing for 360 yards with 2 touchdowns and a pick. Bye week for A&M and back-to-back road games for Auburn. The Aggies have scored 41 or greater points in all 3 games. The Tigers' run game and pass defense a concern here from last week against a conference foe on the road. Auburn 1-6 to the spread on the road against winning teams. Pick here, Texas A&M, -6.5. Akron and Toledo for Saturday. Akron 1-3 after a 51-7 home victory against FCS Duquesne. 2 weeks ago, it was a 31-28 road defeat at UAB. The Zips got their pass game going and rushed for 3.7 yards a carry. They limited the Blazers' ground attack but allowed 341 yards passing for 7.8 yards per pass attempt. Ben Finley, 29 of 35 passing for 282 yards and 2 touchdowns. Toledo 2-2 after a 14-13 road defeat at Western Michigan. The Rockets rushed for 191 yards for 4.5 yards a carry and were miserable in the passing game. They limited the Broncos on the road here and on the ground and allowed 6.1 yards per pass attempt. Tucker Gleason, 15-30 passing for 89 yards and 2 interceptions. Toledo at home against an FBS opponent put up 45 points in a 24-point win. Overall, they rushed for 5.1 yards a carry and got very good performance from the defense. Opponents rushed for 2.9 yards a carry and passed for 5.2 yards per attempt. The Zips, who other defense, give nearly 5.5 yards a carry and 73% completion rate for 9.8 yards per pass attempt. The Rockets 3-0 to the spread at home, on a road loss. Pick here will be Toledo at -21. UConn and Buffalo going off here on Saturday. UConn 2-2 after their 31-25 home victory at Ball State. The Huskies rushed the football effectively, 217 yards for 5.9 yards a carry. Defensively, they allowed 176 yards rushing for 4.8 yards a carry, but 9.1 yards per pass attempt. Joe Fagnano, 20 of 30 passing, 181 yards and a touchdown. Buffalo 2-2 with their 21-17 home defeat to Detroit. The Bulls were ineffective through the air and rushed for only 3.7 yards a carry. They limited the Trojans through the air and allowed 163 yards rushing for 3.4 yards a carry. Daquan Roberson, 9 of 15 passing for 104 yards, but left the game due to injury and is doubtful here. Gunnar Gray, 5 of 13 passing for 49 yards and will likely start. UConn getting great work from their offense here, 6.5 yards per rush, 297 yards passing for 7.9 yards per pass attempt. Roberson's injury here, huge. UConn 4-1 to the spread on the road after a home game. Buffalo 0-3 to the spread at home following a home game. Pick here, UConn -3.5. LSU and Ole Miss, this one for Saturday. LSU improved to 4-0 after their 56-10 home victory against FCS Southeast Louisiana. 2 weeks ago, it was a 20-10 home victory against Florida. The Tigers rushed for 3.9 yards a carry and moved the football through the air. They held the Gators to about 3 yards per rush with 5.8 yards per pass attempt. Garrett Nussmeier here, 15-27 passing for 220 yards with a touchdown and pick. Ole Miss 4-0 with their 45-10 home victory against Tulane. The Rebels had great offensive performance with 548 yards with 5.7 yards per rush. They crushed the Green Wave's passing game, but allowed 178 yards rushing for 4.5 yards a carry. Austin Simmons missed the game due to an ankle injury. Likely starter here. Trinidad Chambliss, 17 of 27 passing for 307 yards with 2 touchdowns. He rushed for 112 yards. LSU's offense struggled in their lone road game, held to 3.5 yards per rush, 6.3 yards per pass attempt in their win at Clemson by 7. Ole Miss is getting balanced offensively here, 5.1 yards per rush, 11 yards per pass attempt. Ole Miss win against Tulane, really impressive as it was before the encounter against LSU. The manner in which they beat Green Wave really stands out here. LSU 1-5 the spread on the road when lying between +3 and -3. Rebels 11-5 the spread at home. Pick here will be Ole Miss here at -1.5. Hawaii and Air Force going off here on Saturday. Hawaii drops at 3-2 with a 23-21 home defeat to Fresno State. The Warriors rushed for only 3.3 yards a carry, and they were ineffective in the passing game. They held the Bulldogs at 2 yards per rush and 230 yards passing for 7.9 yards per pass attempt. Air Force 1-2 with their 49-37 home victory against Boise State. The Falcons were effective through the air and rushed for 269 yards for 4.9 yards a carry. Defensively, they allowed 592 yards to the Broncos and unable to really stop the run or pass. Lamb Zarka here, 13 of 18 passing for 246 yards with 2 touchdowns and a pick. He rushed for 110 yards and a score. Hawaii in their lone road game was hammered to Arizona at 40-6. The Warriors' offense was poor for the year, 3.4 yards per rush, 5.4 yards per pass attempt. The Falcons' offense is rushing for nearly 5 yards a carry with 11.2 yards per pass attempt. Hawaii was held to 23 points at home to FCS Portland State. Hawaii 3-9 to the spread on the road. The pick here will be Air Force -6.5. Tulane and Tulsa, this one for Saturday. Tulane drops at 3-1 after a 45-10 road defeat at Ole Miss. The Green Wave with horrible passing game, but rushed for 178 yards for 4.6 yards a carry. Defensively, they allowed 548 yards to Rebels and unable to really stop the run or pass. Jake Retzloff, 5 of 17 passing for 56 yards. Tulsa 2-2 with their 19-12 road win at Oklahoma State. The Golden Hurricane ran for 205 yards for 4.8 yards a carry, and they limited the Cowboys' passing attack and allowed 185 yards rushing here for 5 yards a carry. Kirk Francis questionable with a concussion. Baylor Hayes 23 of 36 passing for 219 yards and a score. Tulsa getting poor quarterback play, just 5.7 yards per pass attempt, and on defense allowing 5 yards a carry. Tulane has rushed effectively, 214 yards per game, 5.3 yards per rush. Green Wave 6-2 on to the spread on the road as a favorite. Tulsa 2-5 the spread as a home dog. Pick here will be on Tulane -14.5. New Mexico State and New Mexico for Saturday. Mexico State 2-1 with a 49-14 road defeat at Louisiana Tech. The Aggies struggled on the ground, 27 yards, but were effective in the passing game. They allowed 573 yards to the Bulldogs and unable to slow down their run or pass. Logan 5 here, 17 of 33 passing for 281 yards with 2 touchdowns and 2 picks. New Mexico improved to 2-1 with a 35-10 road win at UCLA. The Lobos rushed for 298 yards, 6.5 yards a carry, and they were effective in the passing game. They limited the Bruins' passing attack and allowed 109 yards rushing for 5 yards a carry. Jack Lane here, 12 of 16 passing for 152 yards and 2 scores. New Mexico passing game has been inefficient. The Aggies here, offensive performance has been poor throughout the year. They are rushing for 1.6 yards a carry and 6.8 yards per pass attempt. New Mexico State 6-1 the under in their back-to-back road games. The pick here, New Mexico State, New Mexico under 53.5. Tennessee and Mississippi State for Saturday. Tennessee 3-1 with their 56-24 home victory against UAB. Volunteers racked up 510 yards balanced on the run and pass. They limit the Blazers to 23 yards rushing, but 371 yards passing for 7.1 yards per pass attempt. Joey Aguilar here, 15 of 22 passes for 218 yards with 3 touchdowns and a pick. Mississippi State 4-0 after their 38-19 home victory against Northern Illinois. The Bulldogs were dominant in the running game and passing as well. They limited the Huskies' passing game and allowed 125 yards rushing for 4.5 yards a carry. Blake Shapen, 12 of 20 passing for 160 yards with a touchdown. He rushed for 51 yards in the game. Volunteers played their first true road game. Their pass defense is allowing 67% completion rate and 279 yards a game. The Bulldogs get really good production from their offense. They have a 24-20 home victory against Arizona State with really great pass defense. On the year, Bulldogs allowing 4.8 yards per pass attempt. Shapen has been accurate at quarterback and averaging 8.8 yards per pass attempt. Tennessee 3-6 to the spread here on the road. Pick here will be on Mississippi State plus the 8. Middle Tennessee State is 1-3 after their 42-28 home defeat to Marshall. Blue Raiders rushed for over 4 yards a carry and had success in the passing game. They allowed 3.9 yards rushing, but 261 yards passing for 8.6 yards per pass attempt. Nicholas Vitadio, 19 of 32 passes for 299 yards with 2 touchdowns and a pick. Kennesaw State improved to 2-2 with their 28-21 home victory against Arkansas State. The Owls rolled up 497 yards with really good passing and 3.9 yards per rush attempt. They limited the Redwoods to 3.3 yards per rush and only 5.5 yards per pass attempt. Mario Odom in the game, 25 of 34 passing, 308 yards with a touchdown. He rushed for 101 yards and a score. Middle Tennessee State has struggled on the road, 2.4 yards per rush, only 6 yards per pass attempt. On defense on the road, they are allowing 5.9 yards per rush, 71% completions. Kennesaw State rushing for nearly 5 yards a carry at home with a really good quarterback play. On defense at home, holding teams just about over 3 yards per rush, over 6 yards per pass attempt. Blue Raiders 2-6 to the spread on the road in the conference. Pick here Kennesaw State minus 7.5. Liberty and Old Dominion going off here on Saturday. Liberty fell to 1-3 after their 21-13 home defeat to James Madison. The Flames rushed for 3.8 yards a carry and passed poorly. They allowed 227 yards rushing to the Dukes for 5.5 yards a carry with 8.5 yards per pass attempt. Ethan Vasco in the game, 4 of 10 passing, 37 yards. He rushed 52 yards on a touchdown. He got banged up but got positive news from the head coach this week. Old Dominion 2-1 after a 45-26 road win at Virginia Tech. Monarchs posted 526 yards for rush for 250. They allowed nearly 5 yards per rush to the Hokies with 6.8 yards per pass attempt. Colton Joseph in the game, 16 of 22 passing, 276 yards with 2 touchdowns. Liberty getting very poor quarterback play with lack of accuracy. They allowed 231 yards rushing per game and 6.1 yards per rush. ODU offense has been explosive behind 7.7 yards here per run and efficient play at the quarterback position. The Monarchs were competitive in a spread covering loss in Indiana. Liberty has failed to cover 6 straight dating to last year. They've lost all games against FBS teams by double digits this season. The Flames 1-4 to the spread on the road in the non-conference. Pick here Old Dominion minus 16. Jacksonville State and Southern Miss going off here on Saturday. Jacksonville State now 2-2 after a 45-10 home victory against FCS Murray State. 2 weeks ago, it was a 41-34 road defeat at Georgia Southern. The Gamecocks rushed for 213 yards for 5.1 yards a carry and moved the football through the air. Defensively, they allowed 219 yards rushing for 5.2 yards a carry with 8 yards per pass attempt. Gavin Wimsatt, 17 of 31 passes for 188 yards with a touchdown. He rushed for 50 yards and a score. Southern Miss 2-2 after a 30-20 road defeat to Louisiana Tech. Golden Eagles rushed for 3.5 yards a carry and moved the football through the air. They limited the Bulldogs on the ground and allowed 239 yards passing for 11.5 yards per pass attempt. Braylon Braxton completed 28 of 47 passes for 392 yards with 2 touchdowns and a pick. Golden Eagles have defended well at home. Jacksonville State has gotten really poor quarterback play away from home with poor pass defense. Gamecocks 3-5 the spread on the road in the non-conference. Golden Eagles 4-1 to the spread as a home favorite. Pick here Southern Miss minus 4. Arizona and Iowa State for Saturday. Arizona improved to 3-0 after their 23-17 home victory against Kansas State. The U of A rushed for 234 yards, 5.2 yards a carry, and inefficient in the passing game. They held Kansas on the ground and limited them on the ground and allowed 88 yards passing. Noah Fifita, 16 of 33 passes for 178 yards. He rushed for 48 yards and 2 touchdowns. Iowa sits at 4-0 after a 24-16 road win at Arkansas State. Cyclones were efficient through the air and rushed for 187 yards for 5.5 yards a carry. They allowed 4 yards a carry on the ground of the Redwoods for 222 yards passing for 6.7 yards per pass attempt. Rocco back in the game, 14 of 25 passing, 265 yards with a touchdown and pick in the game. All right, Iowa has been strong on defense this year, getting accurate quarterback play with 8.5 yards per pass attempt. Arizona plays their first true road game. They were pounded in their final 3 road games for a composite score of 146-59 and missed the bowl game. The Wildcats 0-3 to the spread as a road underdog of 7 or fewer points. Iowa State here 3-0 to the spread as home favorite of 3.5 to 10 points. Pick your Iowa State here minus the 6.5. Virginia Tech and NC State. This one going off here on Saturday. Virginia Tech fell to 1-3 after a 38-6 home victory against FCS Wofford. 2 weeks ago, it was a 45-26 home defeat to Old Dominion. The Hokies rushed for 167 yards for 4.9 yards a carry and moved the football through the air. On defense, they allowed 526 yards to the Monarchs, playing extremely poorly against the run and pass. Kyron Drones, 26-39 passing for 266 yards and 3 touchdowns and a pick. He had 65 yards rushing and a score. NC State now 3-1 with a 45-33 road defeat at Duke. Wolfpack moved the football for 535 yards, 171 yards rushing for nearly 5 yards a carry. On defense, they allowed 418 yards in the game, 4.3 yards per rush, 9.6 yards per pass attempt. C.J. Bailey in the game, 29-39, 264 yards with 2 touchdowns and 3 picks. He also lost a fumble. Virginia Tech fired their head coach following the loss at ODU. They let go of their defensive coordinator last year despite good scoring defense a season ago. I thought that was a bad move, and of course led to his demise because Virginia Tech is now allowing over 4.5 yards per rush and 9.7 yards per pass attempt. They have allowed 44 and 45 points in their past 2 games against FBS teams. NC State this year rushing for nearly 5 yards a carry and completing 72% of their passes for 8.5 yards per pass attempt. Wolfpack have struggled defending the pass. NC State has gone over in 5-7. Hokies 9-3 to the over on the road in their past 12. They're away from home. Pick here will be Virginia Tech and NC State over 58. Western Kentucky and Missouri State going off here on Saturday. Western Kentucky now 3-1 after their 31-16 home victory against Nevada. WKU rushed for 145 yards for 4.4 yards a carry. They limit the Wolfpack through the air, but allowed 207 yards rushing for 5.5 yards a carry. Maverick McIver, 22 of 33 passing for 216 yards and a pick. Missouri State 2-2 on the year after a 42-10 home victory against FCS Tennessee Martin. 2 weeks ago, it was a 28-10 home defeat to SMU. The Bears rushed for 2 yards a carry and moved the ball through the air. On defense, they allowed 4.9 yards a carry and 21 yards passing for 7.8 yards per pass attempt. Missouri State is struggling to run the football, 2.9 yards per rush. They have been poor in both running and pass defense. WKU is getting accurate and efficient passing, 67% completion rate, 8 yards per pass attempt. The Hilltoppers have defended the pass well. WKU 2-0 the spread as a favorite of 7 or fewer points. Pick here Western Kentucky here plus the 5. Memphis and FAU going off here on Saturday. Memphis 4-0 after a 32-31 home victory against Arkansas. Tigers gained 489 yards, rushed for 290 for over 7 yards a carry. Defensively, they did give up 500 yards to the Razorbacks. Poor in stopping both the run and pass. Brendan Lewis, 15 of 30 passing for 199 yards with a touchdown pick. He rushed for 103 yards and 2 scores. FAU 1-2 after a 38-28 road defeat to FIU. The Owls are now 1-2 there in this game after the result. The Owls moved the football effectively, 478 yards, 4.4 yards a carry, but defensively they allowed 406 yards in the game with FIU with 224 rushing for 5.5 yards a carry. Kane Batkamp here, 33 of 50 for 343 yards, 2 touchdowns, but 3 picks. He also had a rushing touchdown in the game. Memphis just hitting all the key data points. nearly 6 yards to carry on the ground, 7.5 yards per pass attempt. The whole team's just over 3 yards to carry, 6.8 yards per pass attempt. FAU also had a loss to Maryland by 32, but that was on the road. Their wins came against weak teams in FIU and FCS, Florida A&M. The Tigers have covered 7 straight dating back to last year. They beat an improving Troy team on the road by 21. FAU 1-5 of the spread as a home underdog. Pick here Memphis minus 13.5. Oregon and Penn State going off here on Saturday. Oregon 4-0 after a, pound up the win. Big win here against Oregon State. Was it the 54-7, that neighborhood? Ducks posted 585 yards in a dominating performance. They limited the Beavers to 67 yards rushing, 80 passing in the game. Dante Moore, 21-31 passing for 305 yards and 4 touchdowns. He rushed for 53 yards. Penn State now 3-0 after a 52-6 home victory against VCS Villanova. Prior was a 34-0 home victory against FIU. Penn State rushed for 209 yards for 6.7 yards a carry. They allowed 3.5 yards per rush to the Golden Panthers with 4.5 yards per pass attempt. Drew Allard in the game, 19-33 passing for 200 yards and 2 touchdowns. Penn State has played really a weak schedule. It could be difficult adjusting of the speed here of Oregon without tough opponents so far on their schedule. Oregon, their road win at Northwestern, rushed for nearly 6 yards a carry. Very accurate at the quarterback position here, 78%. They sat starters in the fourth quarter in that game. Could have been even a wider margin of victory. The Ducks 7-3 to the spread on the road. Penn State 1-3 to the spread at home, facing teams that average 31 points per game or greater. Pick here will be Oregon plus 3.5. App State and Boise State. This one going off here on Saturday. we got App State here 2-1 after a 38-22 road defeat at Southern Miss. Mountaineers moved the football through the air, but rushed for only 2.5 yards a carry. On defense, they allowed 4.2 yards per rush, but 279 yards passing for 9 yards per pass attempt. A.J. Swan in the game, 15-23 passing for 217 yards and 3 picks. Boise State 2-1 after a 49-37 road win at Air Force. Broncos piled up 592 yards, dominating the run and pass. Defensively, they allowed 517 yards to the Falcons with 5 yards per rush, 12.5 yards allowed per pass. Maddox Madsen in the game, 13-23 passing for 276 yards, 2 touchdowns and a pick. He expected to play despite being banged up. App State has played a weaker schedule with Southern Miss, Charlotte, FCS, and Lindenwood there. They have 2 road games and given up 5 yards per rush, 71% completions, 9 yards per pass attempt. They have not been able to run the football on the road. Boise State plays their first home game against an FBS foe. Their offensive numbers have been strong here, nearly 7 yards per rush, 292 yards passing for 8.5 yards per pass attempt. App State 0-3 to the spread on the road, followed by Boise State 9-2 to the spread as a home favorite. Pick here Boise State minus the 15.5. UMass and Missouri going off here on Saturday. UMass 0-3 after a 47-7 road defeat to Iowa. Mountaineers rushed for just 26 yards, ineffective in the passing game. Defensively, allowed 201 yards rushing, 5 yards a carry, and 234 yards passing, 7.5 yards per pass attempt. Branson Rhodes injured, won't start. A.J. Harrison just 4 of 8 passing for 56 yards. Is a redshirt freshman. Missouri 4-0. It was a 29-20 home victory against South Carolina. The Tigers posted 456 yards with 285 rushing for 5.9 yards a carry. They held the Gamecocks to negative yardage here on the ground, minus 9 yards with 302 passing for 6.6 yards per pass attempt. Bo Bravilla, 16-27 passing, 171 yards with a touchdown and a pick. He rushed for 72 yards in the game. UMass is rushed for just over 2.5 yards a carry and really bad shape at quarterback. Minutemen are struggling to stop the run and pass. Missouri put up 46 points per game with 6.1 yards per rush. Again, accurate quarterback play. UMass will struggle to get points on the board. Tigers 3-0 to the spread at home when favored by 31 or greater points. Pick here Missouri minus 44.5. San Jose State and Stanford. This one going off here on Saturday. San Jose State 1-2 after a 31-28 home victory to FCS Idaho. Prior, it was a 38-7 road defeat in Texas. The Spartans were ineffective with their passing game, rush for 3.2 yards a carry. They allowed nearly 5 yards per rush to the Longhorns with 317 yards passing for over 9.5 yards per pass attempt. Walker Egat here in the game, 21 of 42 passing, 188 yards with a pick. Stanford now 1-3 after a 48-20 road defeat at Virginia. Cardinal rushed for just over 1 yard a carry. They're inefficient in the passing game. They gave 590 yards to the Cavaliers with 4 stoppages in the run and passing game. Ben Gilbronson here, 20 of 29 passing for 286 yards and two touchdowns. The Spartans are getting inaccurate quarterback play. Stanford has put up some good numbers in their lone home game against BC that resulted in a 10-point win. San Jose State has a 2-point home loss against Central Michigan as they were held to just 14 points. In that home win, the Cardinals held BC just 2.5 yards per rush, 5.8 yards per carry on the ground, per pass attempt, I should say, and efficient quarterback play. So we're going to take care of Stanford here, -3. Alabama and Georgia for Saturday nights. We got Alabama here at 2-1 after a 38-14 home victory against Wisconsin. Crimson Tide rushed for only 72 yards, but had a monster game through the air. Defensively, they held the Badgers to 2.7 yards a carry, 117 yards passing for nearly 7 yards per pass attempt. Ty Simpson in the game, 24 of 29 passing for 382 yards and 4 touchdowns. Georgia sits at 3-0 with a 44-41 road win at Tennessee. Bulldogs gained 502 yards with efficient passing, 198 yards on the ground. They held the Volunteers to 3.5 yards a carry with 371 yards passing for 10.5 yards per pass attempt. Gunnar Stockton in the game, 23 of 31 passing for 304 yards with 2 touchdowns. He rushed for 38 yards and a score in the game. Alabama in their loss at Florida State was held to just 3 yards a carry and 5.9 yards per pass attempt. They allowed 230 yards rushing in the loss for over 4.5 yards a carry. Georgia is getting accurate passing and holding opponents to just 2.7 yards per rush. Alabama 1-4 the spread on the road, facing teams that allow 0.25 yards per rush or fewer. The pick here will be Georgia -3. Washington State and Colorado State, this one for Saturday. Washington State fell to 2-2 after a 59-24 home defeat to Washington. Cougars in the game, that run game was stymied, 27 yards on 28 carries. Defensively, they gave 5.2 yards per rush and 15.7 yards per pass attempt. We got to Zevi Eckhoff, 25-26 passes for 217 yards, 2 touchdowns and 2 picks. He had a rushing score in the game. Colorado State here 1-2 after a 17-16 home defeat to UTSA. Rams rushed for 153 yards for 4.1 yards a carry. They allowed 172 yards rushing to the Roadrunners with 5.2 yards per carry along with 6.4 yards per pass attempt. Jackson Brousseau, 10 of 12 passing for 78 yards and a touchdown. He takes over for ineffective Braden Fowler Nicolosi. Rams passing game has been ineffective. The Cougars have a home win against the Mountain West team in San Diego State by 23. They're in their home stadium. Washington State is getting accurate quarterback play and averaging 8.5 yards per pass attempt. We'll take Washington State here +6. Kentucky and South Carolina for Saturday. Kentucky is 2-1 after their 48-23 home victory against Eastern Michigan. Wildcats put up 492 yards and were dominant rushing as well as in the passing game. Defensively, they allowed 4.4 yards a carry, but 330 yards passing for 7.7 yards per pass attempt. Cutter Bully in the game, 12 of 21 passing for 240 yards with 2 touchdowns. South Carolina 2-2 after a 29-20 road defeat at Missouri. Gamecocks moved the ball through the air, but rushed for negative yardage here, -9. They got crushed defensively, giving up 456 yards with 285 rushing for nearly 6 yards a carry. The North Sellers here, 18 of 28 passing for 302 yards and 2 touchdowns. Kentucky covered at home against the Ole Miss. Very competitive in the game. South Carolina in conference play rushing for less than 2 yards a carry, and on defense giving up over 5 yards per rush and losing both games, including a 31-7 loss at home to Vanderbilt. Wildcats were able to rush for 4.5 yards a carry against the Rebels. They are 6-3 to the spread as a underdog. South Carolina 3-5 to the spread at home against winning teams. We'll take Kentucky here plus 5.5. Marshall and Louisiana for Saturday. Marshall now 2-2 after a 42-28 road win at Middle Tennessee State. Doreen Hurd rushed for 189 yards for 4 yards a carry and effective through the air. They allowed 74 yards rushing to the Blue Raiders, but 300 yards passing for 9.1 yards per pass attempt. Carlos Del Rio Wilson, 18-22 passing, 261 yards, 4 touchdowns. He had a rushing touchdown in the game. Louisiana 1-3, a 34-31 road defeat at Eastern Michigan. Raging Cajuns gained 441 yards with 214 rushing for 6.7 yards a carry. Defensively, they allowed 183 yards on the ground. The Eagles for 5.1 yards per carry and 7.3 yards per pass attempt. Daniel Beal in the game, 20-33 passing for 222 yards and 2 scores. Marshall's defense is holding teams to 3.4 yards a carry, 56% completion rate. Raging Cajuns allowing nearly 5 yards a carry with a 68% completion rate. Marshall, in their lone road game, got really good quarterback play. Doreen Hurd, 3-1 to the spread as road favorite. Louisiana 5-10 to the spread at home. Pick here will be Marshall -1. Louisiana Tech and UTEP for Saturday. Louisiana Tech 3-1 after their 30-20 home victory against Southern Miss. Bulldogs were limited on the ground but effective in the passing game. Defensively, they held the Golden Eagles to 3.5 yards a carry, but 392 yards passing for 8.3 yards per attempt. Trey Kukuk missed the game due to injury. Blake Baker here, 15-21 passing for 239 yards with a touchdown on the ground as well. UTEP drops to 1-3 after a 31-25 home defeat to UL Monroe. The Miners' run game was halted for 33 yards, but moved the football well through the air. They surrendered 250 yards rushing for 6 yards a carry, along with nearly 10 yards per pass attempt. Malachi Nelson here, 22 of 46 passing for 4 and 6 yards with 3 touchdowns and 2 picks. UTEP only win came against an FCS school. Louisiana Tech is playing good defense, holding teams just over 3 yards a carry and just 56% completion rate. UTEP is struggling with their run game, 3.4 yards a carry and getting inaccurate quarterback play. They are 1-3 to the spread at home against winning teams. Pick here Louisiana Tech here, -3.5. BYU and Colorado for Saturday. BYU now 3-0 after their 34-13 road win in East Carolina. Cougars rushed for 172 yards for 5.1 yards a carry and were effective in the passing game. They held the Pirates to 3.4 yards a carry with 285 yards passing for 6.8 yards per attempt. Barrett Bachmeier, 18-25 passing for 246 yards with a touchdown. He had a rushing score as well. Colorado 2-2, a 37-20 home victory against Wyoming. Buffs rushed for 193 yards for 6.2 yards a carry and were effective in the passing game. They allowed 4 yards per rush to the Cowboys with 7 yards per pass attempt. Caden Salter, 18-28 passing for 304 yards, 3 touchdowns. He rushed for 86 yards and a score in the game. Colorado has lost both games against major conference teams in Houston and Georgia Tech. BYU's offense is rushing for 6.5 yards a carry and getting accurate quarterback play. On defense, they hold opponents to 1.7 yards per rush, 5.1 yards per pass attempt. The Buffs defensively give up over 4.5 yards a carry and 8 yards per pass attempt. BYU 2-0 the spread on the road, favored by 3.5 to 10 points. Pick here BYU -7. For more free pick videos, be sure to subscribe to our channel. Lots of free picks over our channel, delivered by myself as well as a team of cappers here at Tony'sPicks.com, making this a great channel to subscribe to. Give us a like and thumbs up. Greatly appreciate it. It really helps us build up our audience when you do that. And then visit our site, Tony'sPicks.com, for our best bets. Our premium plays are there. And use that promo code TonyT at checkout. We'll knock off that 15%. The link's on the description to get signed up. That's going to do it for now. I'm Tony T. We'll talk with you guys later.